Just hydrolocked your engine. You ran through a puddle that was bigger than you thought it would be, probably a good foot or two deep, and your engine stalled out. What do you do now? Well, I'm going to run through real quick a couple of things. First of all, it really depends on how you reacted when it first happened. If your initial reaction was to try to start your engine immediately while in the water, there's a good chance you probably messed things up further. You see, engines essentially run on compression. Well, water doesn't compress, so it just gets locked in there, and if it's the engine's straining to press down inside the cylinders, it can warp the metal parts, and you may end up having to replace your engine flat out. If, by chance, you stalled out, you turned off the ignition, you pushed the car out or got it towed, whatever, you may be in luck. It's possible your vehicle is recoverable. So it also depends on how it happened. From what I've heard, if it managed to get high enough where it's inside your air box right here, well, that's pretty bad because, well, the water would have been high enough to get into the cab and do water damage throughout. You might even have problems where, you know, some fuses in the fuse box right here got messed up, and it's different electric components, and so you have to check the fuses to make sure everything's good there. But to put things in perspective, getting a flooded car is not the end of the world. In fact, the guys at Top Gear, they did this one test just to prove the point. They dropped a car to the bottom of the English Channel, I think it was for 24 hours. They recovered it, did some maintenance on it, and next thing you know, it was driving around fine. But the critical thing is the engine wasn't on when it happened. So what often happens to a lot of people in a heavy storm is, yeah, the air box is situated pretty high, but if you look in the back of your car, oftentimes, like in this car, for example, you can see that the exhaust is not even a good foot off the ground. So what'll happen is you're pushing through, and if for whatever reason you let off the gas in the middle of this big puddle, all of a sudden the water just gets up into the exhaust and into the engine. So that's what happened to me just the other day. Fortunately, I had this happen before, so I knew what to do, so I immediately shut it off, and I was able to recover it yesterday. And I'll show you, I'm just going to show you briefly how I did it. So the first thing is there's going to be water trapped in the air box. So you want to get that out. Well, first things first, let your car sit at least 24 hours so they get nice and dry. But take out your air filter inside, put it in front of a fan, or even just buy a new air filter, whatever. You know, make sure there's nothing nasty in it. Try to clean out the inside of the air box. There's no standing water. Then, of course, you have to check your fuses one by one. So in my case, 4-cylinder engine, so there's this plastic cover right here, 2 screws, bam, bam, and then the spark plugs are all under right there. And so all I had to do was, first of all, safety check, disconnect the battery. You can't skip that step unless you want to get shocked and die potentially. So, and make sure they can't touch each other, you know, tuck them off to the side and everything like that. But, yeah, so anyway, you pull, disconnect the spark plugs, then you get into the well, what's called the spark plug well, and you just need a socket wrench. You just pull out the spark plugs individually. It's possible if you haven't done any maintenance in a while, there could be some oil in the well because you know, the valve cover gasket will tend to leak, and that I had that problem. The middle two spark plugs had a little bit of oil. Fortunately, there was no oil on the tips. So it wasn't affecting the ability for the spark plugs to fire. But anyway, so the trick is what you're doing is you're pulling the spark plugs. You make sure those get dried out nice and good. If you can, take a shop vac to this thing. be aware it's going to be an oily mess that's coming into your shop vac. You don't necessarily have to do the step. I didn't myself, but I've heard it helps in worst case scenarios. But what I did from there is, first I went back into the fuses. I looked it up in the manual and I found out where is the fuel pump fuse, and so I pulled that one and made sure it's completely disconnected. And then going back over here, made sure everything was cleaned out real good. And so what I'm doing is, and then I reconnect the battery after the spark plug wires and everything's set off to the side and the wells are sitting empty. And I took a tarp and some cardboard, which you can see over there I've disposed of, and covered up the top of the engine, because what's going to happen is your engine is essentially going to become a water fountain. So once the batteries reconnect, you go and turn your key in the ignition, just turn it over, and that'll start cranking the engine and giving a little bit of pressure to it, but it's not giving it a fuel, which you don't want that, but it's enough to shove the water straight up into the air. It's going to be oily, it's going to be watery, it's going to be a mess. That's why I set up the cardboard to catch all that. So I do this for a while until it looks like it's sprayed enough and it's kind of emptied itself out. I did it, I cranked it for a good 10 to 15 seconds, and I just kept checking the cardboard to see how much spray was coming up, and when it looked like it was dissipating, I stopped. Okay, so after that, I took some STP and some Marvel Mystery Oil, put it in the engine. I also put some STP in my gas tank on the other end, and I also used some WD-40, and made sure that the engine wasn't going to be dry inside the cylinders. And so I put back the spark plugs, put everything back into place. Of course, don't forget, disconnect the battery before you do all that. Get it all back, get the engine back in place, reconnect, put the fuse back, put the battery back, put the air filter back, and from there, you're ready to try to turn it over. You should expect that it's going to have trouble turning over the first time, partially because if the water came in through the exhaust, you got a lot of it out of this end, but you're going to probably have some water still trapped somewhere in the exhaust. So you may have to, you're turning it over, it's struggling to start, you may have to give it some gas. Just be careful of not giving it too much gas, because if there's water blocking it on the other end, you don't want to build up the pressure and potentially damage your engine. So in my case, I just gave a tiny bit of gas, and eventually was able to shove the water out. It literally spewed about 6 feet of water straight out the back with some nasty brown stuff, and you can see exactly what it looked like over here. And as you can see, that's where my exhaust was, right there, and then it spewed back a good feet. So yeah, make sure nothing's behind it. Otherwise, it's going to be blowing white smoke like crazy. So you want to do this out in the open, not in a garage. So once you get it so it's idling without you having to hit the gas, just let it sit and idle, and keep idling it until there's no more white smoke at all coming out the end of the exhaust. At that point, go ahead and set a stopwatch for 30 minutes. Just let it idle another 30 minutes. At that point, I would suggest taking it for a drive, make sure it's not rattling, no funny noises, nothing seems to miss, even take it on the highway. And as in the case of my car, I have no problems. So hopefully you'll have the same result as me. Good luck.